the restaurant that was most enthusiastic was the one called the Asgard in Irish pub in Cambridge. And the owner said, like, this is great. Like, let me pay. Can I pay this right now? He was the most enthusiastic. When he said that, I'm like, okay, this is our first customer. Let's start building it now. And we started building it for him, for that restaurant. And, I was there just like learning, but I'm like, I still need to learn what the experience is like as a waiter. So I asked him if I could work there, and actually experience what a restaurant was like from the waiter side. And he let me do that. And yeah, I ended up really, really getting super deep on restaurant operations.
Raj, good to see you. Thank you for coming on the pod.
Hey, man, I'm excited to be here.
You have one of the big success stories in YC. I first came across you when I read about you in Paul Graham's articles. And actually, you might not remember this, but 5 years ago, you gave me advice via email on my own YC company. So we've come a long way
Oh, I don't
since.
remember that. Cool.
Yeah. And I have lots of questions because you took a very extreme path to getting to your company, Presto, which went public in 2021. And you didn't have any restaurant experience. You actually ended up working in a restaurant to get that experience. And today I'm very excited for founders to try to put them next to you in the day-to-day, from you have this idea of something you want to build to, the successful launch. I believe it was 2011. But maybe for starters, you could explain to listeners what Presto is, where the business is today, just so listeners understand, okay, cool, this is where the story ends before we go back to the very beginning.
Yeah, happy to do that. Yeah, long journey for sure. I think as a young founder in my early 20s, I didn't have that much business experience. I was a PhD student at MIT. I started the company that became Lyft, but it was still also very early at that time. And um, we're looking for exciting things to like do, and it seemed to me like restaurants was one of the few things that as a young person you have interface with, right? Like it's clearly like a business. It's clearly that has problems, and I had the idea. I think that the lore is actually very accurate in that, like, I did have the idea while eating at a restaurant in Harvard Square in Boston with several other MIT and Harvard engineers. So actually that part is completely accurate. And we had a great meal. It was someone's birthday. And we really did struggle to split the check, and it did take us an hour. And I actually went home that night and I wrote a business plan for the 100K competition, MIT 100K competition, which I didn't talk about that much, but I entered it into the competition the next day. And actually, I lost the competition. I didn't make any progress. I think I did a pitch after that, but that's it. Like I didn't, and there were a lot of people. So the idea, I mean, was that we can make restaurants much better by putting technology at the table. And the idea of a tablet didn't really exist at that time. So I called it a touchscreen mobile device. So it was an idea of putting a device at the table that would help you split the check, but also help you order. And that was the initial genesis. Is like restaurants are so behind. The iPhone had just been released 6 months prior to that, and you're like, technology is amazing, but restaurants are so behind, and why is that? I learned there were very good reasons for that, later. But as a naive guy in my early 20s, it didn't make any sense, and so yeah, that got me inspired. And at MIT and even my undergrad at Waterloo, there was a very good hardware. There's a very strong hardware ethos of building hardware products and technology, and so I was very comfortable with hardware. I didn't know the difficulties of it as much, but like I was like very comfortable with building hardware. Um, and so the idea of inventing a tablet to like put at restaurants didn't seem far fetched to me. It didn't seem like crazy that I would just like invent this concept of the tablet. Um, and so that was the initial thought. And I kind of got obsessed with it in terms of like, I'm like, hey, this could make things so much better. And it seemed really fun to like build a tablet from scratch. And so I just went, with my spare time at my PhD, I used to just go to restaurants and like talk to the owners and ask to speak to the owners and pitch them this idea. and owners were enthusiastic. I mean, like they were not, they were not like, they're like, yeah, this could work. That could say, that could help me out. And so I was like, this is way more fun than doing a PhD. Didn't really like doing a PhD anyways. It was like, after like having, the Lyft experience, it was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do startups. And so even though I got into this amazing PhD program, which actually was a PhD MBA, and it was a free ride, like it was like it was basically paid for. Um, I still enjoyed the chaos of startups, and I didn't like the structured life of a PhD, and the lack of risk. I actually bothered me. So I'm like, even though it was 2008 recession time, and every single person I talked to at MIT and outside, like the startup world, thought I was crazy. Um, but I still enjoyed it, and I never looked back. I still remember the call where at some point I just picked up the phone and called my advisor. I'd already passed my quals, so like I had already like done everything I need to do to get my PhD. Like all the hard parts of like doing the PhD were kind of done in terms of like the quals are like where you fail out. But so I had like the next 4 years planned, um, and I had a thesis planned as well. So it was a big moment to call and just say like I'm just not going to continue. And they try to keep me. They try to like pitch me to stay, and but I was pretty sure. And I ended up getting a master's on the way out, which is just like a weekend of work. It was like I just wrote it in a weekend, and my advisor told me it was one of the worst master's thesis he's ever read, but he still passed me. So I needed that for my visa actually, so that's why I got a master's. I'll pause for any questions. Yeah, I can go
Yeah.
on.
Okay. So that was super helpful overview. And it's interesting to hear that the lore is in fact accurate. But you were at a birthday dinner. It took an hour to figure out how to split the bill amongst all of you. Now, so that's a really interesting starting point. The thing that I have noticed sort of repeatedly is founders can start from the same problem and have multiple manifestations of the solution. Some do well, some don't. I could have experienced that problem and thought splitwise is the right approach. But not only did you change the person experiencing the problem, i.e., you went to the restaurant and not your fellow students, you also went hardware and not software. I imagine that was very intentional. I'm curious how you went from we have this problem with splitting a check to actually building a tablet for restaurants. Like, walk me through the calculus there.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, why not software? I mean, a lot of people did land on software. I mean, like actually, PayPal was started on a very similar thesis. Even Reddit, their first idea was like a restaurant ordering mobile app.
I didn't know that.
So there were a lot of actually companies started on the same problem statement, and so yeah, I guess for me it was the inspiration of the iPhone, and the iPhone was like like the iPhone really inspired me to want to build devices, and so it more came out of like this desire to create something beautiful that the iPhone kind of inspired. It's like, wow, this is amazing. I want to be in that business of creating devices.
So, was it really just that? Was it because you're also changing the person experiencing the problem? You experience the problem as the customer in the restaurant, but you ended up selling to the restaurant owners themselves.
Yeah, but I mean, to put the device on the table, you need the restaurant's permission. I think also I thought that the hardware was the best solution as well. I mean, because it's right there, so you don't have to pull out your phone. And in fact, for the first 10 years of the company, I was battling this very same thing. Even at some point, Sequoia took us to the partner meeting, and like one person vetoed it. Out of 12 people, 11 people wanted to do the deal. One person vetoed it, and that person told me it was because he thought it would be a mobile app instead.
Right.
So, um, and it turned out it wasn't actually. It didn't actually, and the product still exists. I mean, like people use devices to pay at restaurants today. So, like, you still need hardware, and so that was a battle that we fought for like a long time after.
This is sort of the perennial founder concern, though, of how you de-risk these like various avenues. How did you de-risk this?
De-risk which part?
Like, is the right form factor a device, a tablet that I create? Is it like let the iOS App Store mature, and I'll build an app that integrates? How do you sort of de-risk
I
the
just
form
thought
factor?
I thought about it from first principles. Like, if I'm a user in a restaurant, do I want to be pulling out my phone and fiddling with an app, or do I want to just have something right there that's like 1 or 2 taps away. If you just look at the number of taps and the seconds it takes to access something, it was pretty clear that a dedicated device would be the fastest way for a consumer, and it would be, because it's purpose built for restaurants, it's also easier to support for the restaurant. Because if I'm a waiter, I can't pull out your phone for you and tell you how to pay, but I can show you how to pay on this device that is made for me and made for my restaurant. So that part all worked out. That part,
Mm.
actually, the thesis worked out pretty well. Um, the part of the thesis that didn't work was like, I can explain, going into detail, but like, for small restaurants, like the one I went to, I was at a Chinese restaurant. It didn't actually work out. The sales process ended up becoming, very tricky, and the integration to point of sale systems, the back end, ended up being impossible to solve. And so the only way to solve that was actually what Toast ended up doing: just build their own POS system, like a fully integrated system, and that was the only way to solve that problem. But on the chain side, it was tractable because they all use the same 2 or 3 point of sale system, so we could build integrations with it.
Super interesting. Um, okay, so that night you go home from the restaurant, you write a business plan. The business plan is effectively this. There weren't any pivots. It was the
Yeah,
tablet
I
on
still
the
have a
thing.
copy of it. Yeah, Check Please, it was called, I think, the company. Yeah.
Interesting. And so then what does day two look like? How do you go about de-risking? Maybe you don't go about de-risking, sort of the various hypotheses. What does day two look like?
I was talking to users, and that's still for all my new companies, that's what I've been doing. It's like, talk to as many customers as you could, like really try to get the first sale before you start building.
Yeah.
So the next 6 months was just talking to users, and I didn't start building it until the following summer in 2008. So I had the idea in I think December 5th, 2007, and then I started building in maybe June 2008. So the rest of the time was like all just talking to customers.
When did you say you had the idea? It was end of 2007?
December 5th, 2007, I think. Yeah.
Um, okay, interesting. And at some point you took a job in a restaurant to learn more about it. So I want to get back to that. But okay, so you have the idea, you start interviewing smaller, no, you're not going to chains, you're going to smaller ones because
Yeah,
that's the
yeah. I
restaurant that
went
you
to some
went
chains
to.
too, but in chains you can't go talk to the like CEOs. You have to just
Right,
talk to the local manager.
right. And had you brought a prototype or did you sort of describe the outline of it?
At that point, no. At that point, no. I didn't even have mock-ups. I was just describing. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Like my
And they were like, yeah, it seems interesting. Of course, now there's like way more startup literature, and we all know that like seems interesting is a dangerous thing to follow. But at the time, they said seems interesting. Yeah, it could be useful for us, and that gives you the conviction to start building. Is that right?
yeah, yeah. Basically, there was enough interest in it. I probably had some wishful thinking, honestly. Like, people seem like positive, but I'm like, oh, they seem like they're gonna buy tomorrow. So like, looking back on it, like, you probably have some wishful thinking as well.
Another perennial founder concern is that, and this is why the why now question exists. But there's this concern of if it were solvable, and there isn't a crisp why now. The fact that it hasn't been solved might suggest that the problem is intractable. It is not profitable to solve. Whatever. Uh, was this something that concerned you at the time? And did you give this thought?
You know, I find that's often a fallacy for almost everything I've done. Almost everything I've done, there's always all this like very obvious pushback. Like even for like Lyft, right? It was like, oh yeah, Craigslist rides exist, right? Why would we need something else? Like the Craigslist had rideshare, and everyone kind of assumes something exists. Now I'm working on Tribe. I was like, oh yeah, we have like WhatsApp and like for Lima immigration, there's like, oh yeah, there's so many immigration lawyers. People often miss the very they don't understand the market size, and B, they don't really understand the product nuances that can make a big difference. So, like, for example, I used to get pushback for Presto. Like, yeah, they had handheld payment terminals from Verifone and Ingenico. They're like, oh yeah, this exists. It's like Verifone. These things exist. But what I was thinking was different. Was just like a tablet that lived on the table, and that was easy for consumers to use, not just that you brought it at the end of the meal. Um, and so those nuances actually make a big difference. Like, it's a huge difference. And it turned out the Verifone and Genical stuff went away. Like, it was like they didn't have any traction after a few years because there were point-based solutions that had minimal value. Um, so so yeah, I think people miss the nuances, and they just kind of like unless you talk to users, unless you kind of really flesh out your idea, you don't really really learn. I think, and you can easily go down the wrong path.
At some point, you end up actually working at a restaurant. So you spent 6 months interviewing people. Did you feel like you weren't getting deep enough, and that's why you went to go get a job at a restaurant?
No, no. One of I mean, the restaurant that was most enthusiastic was the one called the Asgard in Irish pub in Cambridge, and the owner said like, "This is great. Like, let me pay. Can I pay this right now?" He was the most enthusiastic. So I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And then I'm like, "Let's build it." So when he said that, I'm like, "Okay, this is our first customer. Let's start building it now." And he's the one like we started building it for him for that restaurant. And I was there just like learning, but I'm like, I still need to learn what the experience is like as a waiter. So I asked him if I could work there, and actually experience what a restaurant was like from the waiter side, and he let me do that. And at that point, like we became really good friends, and like yeah, I mean, our relationship continued for a decade plus after that. But like, um, and actually, the restaurant unfortunately is no longer around. Otherwise, we'd probably still be hanging out there, once in a while going there. But it's yeah, it started because of a customer, and the customer let me work there. And yeah, I ended up really, really getting super deep on restaurant operations.
Um, I know the world looked very different in 2010, 2011, but nowadays there's this sense of if this product doesn't get deployed ASAP, there's probably a dozen others exploring the problem space, and people can raise a lot of money now. And therefore, if I spend a lot of time learning about the problem space, maybe I will be too late to market. Uh, how did you deal with this while you were trying to sort of grasp the restaurant industry and how it works?
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me like how early or late we were. I didn't have the experience to know that at that point. I always thought I was late, but of course ended up being 5 years, 4 years too early. So like, and it did turn out there was a competitor working on the same thing in Texas, which ended up becoming our competitor for the next, you know, 15, like until we eventually left the space. So there was actually someone else working on it, and in that case, the paranoia. We were both early, so it was like a crazy thing was that we were both early, um, and but yeah, um, you always thought you're late, and like trying to move fast as possible. Obviously, at this point, I'm a lot more aware of these pitfalls, and I know kind of like to assess like how early or late you are, and then you have to change your strategy based on that. Like if you're late, you got to raise money, go super fast. If you're early, you just got to survive and like flesh out the thesis and like kind of grow in a slow way until like the market kind of reaches understands what you're doing. So it's very different, but I ended up just not really understanding what I was doing and just kind of trying to go as fast as I could, regardless of the market conditions.
How do you suss out whether I'm on the early side and therefore it's a survival game, or on the late side and I need to raise a lot of capital? Is that via customer conversations and like their awareness of the
I think it's
solution?
actually fairly easy to understand because yeah, there's like if you're late, then other companies are in this space are growing rapidly, um, and they're growing rapidly with a similar idea. Um, you don't want to be. I mean, in that case, like you're basically almost depending on how long it takes to build a product, you might be too late to even compete. Um, but yeah. So I think that's the number one thing is like where are the other companies in this space? How fast are they growing? And even if like you have some companies that's starting to emerge, that's a concerning thing, for like how late you are.
Hmm.
But if you're in a space where there's basically no one else, and like no one is really growing, no one really has traction, you're probably too early.
Yeah. Okay. And I want to ask you about that as well. Um, often founders will have an idea. I talk to founders all the time who are like looking for ideas. Often they'll have ideas and they'll say, Sunny, there's no competitor. And so the market is clear. But my retort to that is always, maybe there isn't a competitor because there's no market there. And so how do you think about this?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. That's definitely possible. If there's no competitor and you're growing super fast, great. Like you're, then that's like ideal scenario, which almost never happens. Either way, you're growing fast, like someone else is trying to clone you, and especially if you're VC backed, because VC back has a lot of leakage of information. Um, but if you're like no competitor and you're not growing fast, and you don't have that much revenue, you're probably too early. Yeah.
How do you know you're too early as opposed to there's just no market for what you're building? How do you think about this?
It's not. There's no clear way of knowing that, but like I think it, if customers seem interested in what you're doing, you have good retention, you have good like. There's some indication that like it fundamentally solves a problem, but they don't fully understand it. It's possible you're just too early.
Mm.
If they don't really understand what you're doing at all, and like there's doesn't seem to be any appetite, you should be working on this. But like most founders will probably figure that out soon,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So you have to just see like what is the customer, what are they saying to you, and how are they acting? Like if they're just hesitant because they haven't seen anything like that before, it's probably early. But they're interested in the value prop. If the value prop sounds sound to them, it sounds interesting, but they're just hesitant because it's no one else is doing it, and that's kind of a good sign early. If it just doesn't make sense to them at all, then there's no market. But then you shouldn't even be working on it.
Hmm. I want to go back to this notion that it's a fallacy when folks point out the existing solutions are good enough. Often that's fallacious reasoning, and there's a lot of nuances in like a more
Yeah.
specific solution. The difficulty there is, especially if you're a founder from outside of that market, like you were with restaurants, you don't really figure out the nuances until you spend so much time with your ICP that you've like learned that what the nuances could be. Um, and so, we can talk about Lyft, we can talk about Presto, but how did you sort of outline the nuances that you would be exploiting? And like, how did you figure this out?
Um, so can you repeat the premise of the question? How do you figure out which part?
Like you said, folks will often push back on ideas and say, look, there's a good enough solution out there already in the
All right.
market. And the whole thesis of the business is that it's not good enough. My business will do better by exploiting the nuances.
Mhm.
But figuring out that nuance is very expensive. You have to spend a lot of time with your ICP. And maybe that's the only
Yeah,
solution,
yeah.
but I'm curious what you
I mean, that's why you need to have genuine passion for what you're building. Initially, something you really want to see exist in the world. The people who are in it for the money only, I think, like it's hard for them to do that, right? It's hard for them to really go and find those product nuances. Um, but everything I've done, I've had genuine passion for. So for me, it was never that difficult. I like spending time with the customers. I liked like inventing things. I like figuring out why it would work and why it wouldn't work. For me, that's actually the most fun part. Is like this piece of it. So, um, and I don't think I have an ego either. Like if people are disproving some part of what I believe, then I will understand why, and I was happy to like change direction based on the feedback. And there's many. I mean, like post Presto, I had like 25 ideas, and for my next companies, and I went through this process too, where I like kind of ranked them and went talked to a bunch of users in those spaces, and there were some that I realized is like the user, it's either not big a market, or users are well served, or users
Hmm.
don't like the particular type of idea that I have, and you can quickly figure that out, I think, after talking to a bunch of users. So I don't think it's that difficult. I do know a lot of builders just don't like talking to users, and like don't go the extra mile to have the real high quality conversation that you need to have.
In
Like I mean, I
2021,
went door to door in restaurants in Boston. Like
yeah,
I don't know how many MIT engineers would do that. Like
yeah.
just looking at objectively, yeah, looking back at it, like objectively, like I realized that that's probably not something that most people like to do.
It's interesting that your thesis stayed the same, the product stayed the same from that night that you wrote the business plan. Was the fact that integrating with POS systems at small restaurants impossible slash prohibitively difficult? Was that the only place where your thinking was incorrect? Were there other places that reality did not fit with your thesis?
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic thesis of the product made a lot of sense, and it ended up making even more sense than I thought it would, because we ended up doing games on the tablet, and the games were paid games, ended up paying for the whole thing. So it ended up becoming a free product for the
Mm.
restaurant. So it was kind of a no-brainer for them. I mean, they got efficiency gains, labor savings, and they got additional revenue. Um, and so that wasn't part of my original thesis. I didn't realize people would pay for games at a restaurant, but I didn't have kids, and it turns out most people with kids like to have their kids entertained during a meal. So, so that was a part where we learned later. I didn't realize how expensive labor would get. Like labor savings wasn't part of the initial thesis, because labor was actually very cheap, 2008. But by 2015, 2016, when the country reached full employment, labor became a big thing, and people started to think more about labor savings. That drove a lot of growth post that period. Um, and I didn't realize the difference between an enterprise and SMB, and how they think about these things differently. I didn't realize that hospitality, like the people who go into hospitality, like the restaurant industry, do that because they want more human interaction, not because they want less. And they just have the personality where they want to serve others. And that was actually a big barrier to sales, like, because it's like there was a gut reaction that technology is bad or it takes away from the human touch. And that especially hurt the SMB sales. Like the enterprise was a lot more like, cold hearted, calculated, like, I want to make more money. I deploy this, I make more money, my bonus goes up. But the artisan, the restaurant owner, I mean, it's kind of irrational to open a restaurant. Like, you're working super hard and you make almost no money, right? What do you get out of it? You get the feeling of like taking care of others. So like, restaurant SMBs can be very irrational. And actually, if you look at the Toast go to market motion, it's all based on like basically giving away a free product, which is the POS, and monetizing on the payments. And these people, these artisans, are basically too emotional to really understand that they're actually paying more money,
Mm.
but off the payment, things,
Mm.
off the payment share,
Mm.
versus paying cash for the POS.
Mm.
So they actually feel like they're saving money, but they're actually making money. So it's kind of like a trick, you know,
Mm.
uh, brilliant one, um, but that's what Toast successfully did. Um, yeah. So, anyways, I didn't realize a lot of things going into that. The basic thesis was wrong on just understanding. I thought SMBs would use this, and we for the next few years we did try selling to both SMBs and enterprise, but ended up not working for SMBs. And I don't think it would ever work for SMBs. I don't think,
Yeah.
like, nothing has changed. It would never work for SMBs. And Toast, they have it fully integrated now, and what they have is a handheld for
Yep.
ordering and payment. So everyone has this now. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's become the main product. But for enterprise, the tablet on the table still exists. Like, there's
Yeah.
still that competitor in Texas now owns 100% of the market, the same one that we started competing with, and they have like tablets in, like, 5,000, 6,000 restaurants in the U.S.
Yeah. I'm in Texas, so I'm familiar with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, in 2021, you emailed me and said, "Don't pick a market first. Pick a product that you want to see in the world and start there instead." This is a contrarian take. Almost every partner, VC, whatever, will say start with the market and then you can like feel around for a product.
Mhm.
You can heat seek, right? This is the common phrase. Um, Walk me through that thinking.
Yeah. Look, as I said, that to have the passion to build what you want to build, like, I think you want to solve a specific problem. So, and the solution to that problem is a product. So it's like, that's what ends up, I think, motivating a lot of my startups. Almost all my startups are based on that. I think every single one is based on like a problem that I personally have had. Um, and I like, building a product to solve that problem. And that I think that energy, that passion gets you through a lot of challenges, which would cow others, right? Now, I don't think that picking the market first is necessarily a bad idea if you can remain disciplined, um, and not get bored. You know, like, the classic counterexample for me, there are two major counterexamples. Um, Actually, one is Samsara. Samsara, they explicitly picked, and they were on my podcast, and they talked about this. Like, they picked like a very boring market, and they just went to that market and said, "What are your problems?" And they found some problems that they could solve with technology, and they built like a massive business around it, like several billion ARR. Right? I'm an investor in Samsara. I'm a very happy investor, um, and so that actually model works to make money, and I'm happy to invest in those companies that people who do that. But I would never want to work at Samsara, or I would never want to ever spend my life working at that type of paradigm. I think it's
Mm,
boring. I think
mm,
you pick a market and you're like trying to solve them. Like it's more like deterministic,
mm.
and there's less creativity involved. It's just like you're following instructions. So for me, it's like it's less entrepreneurial from my perspective.
I suppose the counter is, let's take Presto. Let's say Presto did not work out for whatever reason in the initial form factor that you had thought. If it was a shitty market, it would be hard to pivot slash iterate to something else. Whereas the whole pick market first recommendation is that if your initial product is wrong, which is wrong very often. In fact, I'm very surprised to hear that your initial thinking was spot on. Then you have a lot of room to wiggle. Do you agree with this thinking?
Yeah. I agree. And so I said, I think market first, you can make more money, and you absolutely. I mean, the profile of the restaurant market, I did not understand the nuances there, and I did not understand like how poor restaurants were. I didn't look at the P&L of a restaurant, for several years after I started the company, and I didn't realize that like SMBs are like really really tight, and even enterprise restaurants are like barely making 5-10% margin. Um, so I didn't realize that, and if I did realize that, it probably would give me pause, because it's like you don't want to sell to poor customers. You don't want to sell a high end product to poor customers, and Presto was a high end high technology product, right?
Yeah.
And the business fundamentals were not in our favor. So in Presto's case in particular, I was blinded to the business realities, and I think that became very painful downstream.
Mm,
Um, and so I wouldn't advise doing that. Like, yes, I think you want to do both, though. You can pick a product that you love, and you start there. Start with a product that you love, and then you think about how to go to market in a way that makes sense, and you maybe iterate through markets until you find one that actually makes sense. Now it's possible that the product and market combination that just doesn't work, right? Like, you ended up saying, oh yeah, there's a lot of people who like need credit cards, who are low income. So I'm going to sell them like an Amex for like, low income people. And that probably doesn't work, right? So
yeah.
like, there's just some combination that just don't work. And I think for Presto, for many years, I was trying to shoehorn in a very difficult combination. And the difficulty of business that Presto is just like an incredibly difficult business.
Mm,
So like, you're doing hardware, doing gaming, you're selling to like an antiquated market, um, and it's a vertical space which also has its own challenges. So you run out of market as well, um, which doesn't really like technology to begin with, right? Like it's an anti-technology space, um, and there was just a number of other like sort of really big challenges. So you're taking on just so many levels of difficulty in the same
mm,
company.
mm,
Um, Made it very difficult, a very difficult journey, but ultimately I think I came out the other side a significantly better entrepreneur.
mm. Last question, I think, on the Pressa story is, when did you first raise capital for it? What prompted you to raise the capital? What gave you the conviction to raise the capital?
Yeah. Well, we were constantly being rejected for this crazy idea, and we raised a little bit of capital at MIT, and then we raised some capital from the restaurant that we sold to, the Asgard. The owner of the Asgard turned out to be a franchisee of Applebee's, who had retired, and he refused to meet me, and the guy I was talking to, the manager, was refused to introduce me. So I actually stalked him, and like basically when he was at the restaurant, I just kind of approached him and like introduced myself, asked him if he'd be an advisor, and he said yes. And then I built a relationship with him and asked him if he'd invest, and he said yes. And then he introduced me to a bunch of other people at Applebee's, and then Applebee's became our first enterprise customer. So that first restaurant, like where I worked, ended up leading us to our first big enterprise deal,
Mm,
2013, I think it was,
mm.
which landed us in USA Today and Good Morning America, etc.
There are a few people in the world who have as much experience as you do in starting companies. When you have a new idea now, when you're looking for ideas now, uh, what is the process like?
Yeah. So I always start with the problems that I've personally faced or have observed that are close to me. And that's always my process. And now the more that I've experienced, the more problems I've observed and or experienced. So I have actually way more ideas now than I did, when I started. And so I have a long list that I keep. I still update that list. And you know, I, I I have a good sense of all the problems. And then I pick the ones that I think are relatively underserved or I think not a lot of people are thinking about. And that would be fun to work on for like a decade plus.
Hmm.
In some cases, you can find other founders working on it, and then you just invest in those. In some cases, you can't, and it'd actually be really fun to work on yourself. Like I think it's a very different decision as to whether work on something or invest in something. If something is good business but it's not that fun to work on, it's better to invest,
Hmm.
right? And if something is super fun to work on, but it's not a good business, then it's probably more of a hobby too. You probably don't want to work on it. Like I think that's experience teaches you that. Um, but I'm still okay with investing in that space because I want to support something even if it's really hard. And it's something I believe in. But then the thing you want to work on is something fun to work on and would be a good business. So you want to find the merger of those two things.
Would you be open to walking us through you mentioned like there's a lot of ideas you have, you kill off and you kill a lot of them. Would you be open to actually walking us through what one of those ideas was? How did you kill it? Like why did you kill it off? What data
Yeah.
point gave you that conviction?
Yeah, absolutely. So one idea I had coming out of Presto was this idea of like um, uh, spare chargers for your phone for rent that would be available everywhere. So I went to China. My wife is Chinese, so I go to China a lot, and they have this everywhere. This is a big thing in China.
Mm,
You can basically go and pick up a battery for your phone anywhere, right? And like it's you scan a QR code and a battery pops out. And like every restaurant, every establishment. So you basically don't even like I'm at my desk right now. I'm still charging my phone, right? But you don't do that in China. In China, you don't even worry about battery, like you don't even think about it. So there's no
mm,
battery like this concern, and so it's a really nice service because it really takes away a big concern that people have when they're out on the town. I'm like, can we bring this to the U.S.? And we started we the product is actually relatively easy to get because there's so much supply. Um, I even have one in my house where did some testing, and then then you have to put this in physical establishments, and so you do some kind of rev share physical establishment. But then the question is, would people actually use it? Like, would people actually scan? It's a new behavior you have to kind of get up and running from ground up, and that's where we really started to like have some doubts. Like, okay, would people actually scan this QR code? We saw there were a couple of people doing this already, with often Chinese manufacturers. And we went there and it was like people didn't really understand what was going on with this box. It wasn't something that was attractive. Where in China, they built up a habit to do it. In the US, there was no habit. And and even though you could probably convince a physical establishment to put it in their thing, the question is how would you attract people to actually use it. And I know the difficulties of that because at Presto we had the same problem where we had these tablets, and initially it was very hard to get people to use them.
mm,
Even if a tablet, people didn't know what it was, they didn't want to touch it. It's like, what is this thing on my table? Like they thought it might be
mm.
left by mistake. So we had to develop a whole system about adoption. We eventually got really good at it, but so I knew some of the challenges that we would have, and ultimately it didn't make the cut for like something to work on. Um, there were a couple other companies initially in this space. I don't know how they're doing, but I haven't seen this become like a big trend in the U.S. yet. There are some airports which have this, um, but yeah, it's basically building a habit from the ground up is not easy, and like it's kind of similar to a Lyft scenario and a Presto scenario, and like the scooters and all these other like sort of physical things that people use. And yeah, so it's a very similar journey to that. But I also did some spreadsheet analysis and was like, I don't know if this would actually be that big of a market either.
Yeah. You said you went somewhere and that's how you validated whether people would have the habit. What did you do to find that out?
I went to a few places here in the U.S. that had battery chargers. There was like one or two companies working on it, and they
Uh,
had like two in the Bay Area. So I
uh,
went to them, and I saw like how how it's being used, and it turned out it wasn't being used very much at all. And the reason was like people just didn't understand what it was.
I
Like
see. People were just like walking right by it and not
yeah,
interfacing with it. I see.
yeah,
And then
yeah,
how do you why do you let's assume the spreadsheet math worked out and it was a big market.
yeah.
Why didn't you think to yourself, "Oh, I mean, great. I could educate the market here and then own the entire market." Like why didn't you make that choice?
I think educating the market is not easy. It's very difficult. And like you're basically have to educate every consumer, right?
Mhm.
So in Presto's case, the way we educated the consumers was the waiters did that. We trained the waiters, and they were incentivized. They had
Right.
bonuses attached to that, right? In this case, the waiter wouldn't really have an incentive to do that, and like even a small rev share, I don't think would move the needle enough for a restaurant to really promote it. In China, it was actually their DoorDash equivalent that did this thing, right? And I actually talked to DoorDash about like, hey, why don't we do? I can help you do this, right? This would be something that you should do because DoorDash has the presence and the brand that people would trust it, to like go and do this thing. So I think there is yeah, there is like a number. Educating the market is something that you got to feel like I really can do well, and the upside has to be worth it. Like it has to be like, oh, if we do this, it's clearly like several billion in revenue, and it's not clear that it was worth it from my spreadsheet math. Because I'll tell you another thing, it's like why would you use a battery charger? I mean, America's a driving country. Everyone drives. Everyone has a charger in their car. So you only need it if you're out on the town and you're a tourist or you're in a walking city, and there's just not enough of that in the US, I think, to like justify, the this thing. Whereas China and other countries, I mean, like in Europe, it might make a lot of sense. In fact, in Europe, they have this, where if you use a car less, you're probably more likely to use the type of thing.
Yeah. Do you and this is my last question for the episode. When you start with a product, are you starting with a product or are you starting with the problem statement? And the reason I ask is because I know many founders who've started with the problem statement and just sort of iterated on the problem statement, various solutions to that problem until it worked. Whereas it sounds like in both of those products you told me about, you started with a sort of a crisp product idea. Is that your go-to, or do you start with a problem statement or something in between?
I think I think it's probably something in between. I love building products. Probably have some blind spots, on the business side because I love building products. Um, and Sometimes like the products I want to build because I want some kind of like amazing beauty to exist in the world that I think deserves to exist in the world. That's probably my initial bias in every scenario is very product oriented. But uh, the way I land on a product tends to be a problem that I've experienced. And so then it's kind of a back and forth, right? It's like you start with a problem, they're like, oh, this product would be amazing, that would help solve this problem and do so much more, right? And then you have to iterate back to the problem. Is it actually solving the problem? Yes, it is. Okay, but what other problems can we solve now that we built this, right? So it's kind of not it's not a maniacal focus on just
Yeah,
one thing. It's a back and forth thing. Like the Presto example, started off with payments, ended up games were a big revenue source, and then loyalty programs became
yeah,
another thing, right? So there is we ended up being far beyond the initial problem statement, and we ended
yeah,
up becoming more product oriented.
yeah,
It's still like, okay, now that you have a hardware device, what else can you do?
yeah. Roger, I appreciate you telling the story. I think a lot of founders will hear this and walk away with new mental models, often contrarian mental models. And I hope people are thinking about ideas and they'll wonder like, oh, how does Raj think about this? And that's kind of the goal of the pod is to like equip folks with mental models that come from Raj and others such that they can sort of optimize the way they find ideas and products. You have new companies now. Our audience is predominantly prospective founders, early startup employees, pivoting founders. Any plug for the audience? Anything you're looking for from us?
Yeah, there's two things working on that could help. Well, three things. One is I have a podcast called Founders in Arms, so founders may enjoy listening to that. We had a great live episode with Max Mullen, the co-founder of Instacart, this week. And we had Emmett Shear recently from Twitch. So we have some great founders coming on that and some great conversations. I think founders can learn a lot from that. I have a lot of founder communities that I host on Tribe, which is my next generation group chat platform. Um, if you just, the invite is founders.tribechat.com. You can come join the Founders in Arms community there, which has links to a bunch of other founder communities. So we're trying to build the world's best set of founder communities on there, on chat. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. There's like parenting advice and like, parent communities, sports communities, and fitness communities, etc. So there's like, we're building communities for everything. And then another organization that I run is called Lima, which helps skilled immigrants. We're sourcing talent globally and bringing them to the U.S., and we're helping immigrants who are struggling here in the U.S. as well. So if anyone has an immigration issue, I'm an immigrant myself. I've been through the ringer, and I want to help others. So that's you can go to limadream.com and check that out.
Awesome.
So
Raj,
a
thanks for
lot
your
of stuff
time.
for founders. Yeah,
Awesome. Raj, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
absolutely. Yeah, great having. Thanks for having me, and this was a lot of fun.